I'm Marcus Bell, 32 ex-mechanic, younger brother, invisible son. The valet barely glanced at me when I pulled up midnight blue, humming like a cathedral. I'd built it from the skeleton of a 1986 Jaguar, restored every inch with my own hands. Matte chrome finish, custom leather seats, V12 heart. It purred as I parked it in front of the facility's wide glass doors, the same rehab center where I spent 90 days detoxing, healing, and writing letters my family never answered. The place was too clean, too quiet. White pebbles lined the front garden like a funeral arrangement. I left the keys in the ignition, engine still on, not out of forgetfulness, just it didn't feel like I needed to turn it off yet. A young woman in scrubs opened the door before I could knock. "Sir, family pickup only today," she said. She looked behind me. "Are they coming later?" "No," I said. "I'm here for myself." Her smile flickered. Awkward. She stepped aside anyway. Inside, the reception hall smelled of lavender disinfectant and cold soup. A few staff lingered by the front desk, pretending not to stare. I scanned the room. No one from my family, no brother, no cousin, no text, no missed call. "Are you sure your ride isn't just late?" asked the nurse behind the desk. Her eyes darted from my worn duffel bag to my boots. Sometimes they forget the release paperwork. They didn't forget. I said, "They're not coming." Silence. A young guy I recognized from group shuffled past me with his mother. She hugged him like he'd survived a war. Another patient was getting balloons tied to her wheelchair. I smiled, nodded, kept my face steady. Bell, someone called, a clipboard in hand. "Yeah. You can go ahead and sign here." I scrawled my name and felt my throat tighten. Not because I was leaving rehab, but because no one gave a damn that I was leaving clean. 3 months sober, 3 months breaking apart and rebuilding, and they couldn't even send a text. "You want me to call someone?" the receptionist asked softly. "No. I have a ride." I stepped back outside. It was still there. My car, parked like it belonged. People passed by. One guy actually slowed down and whistled low. "That yours?" he asked. "Built it in rehab," I said. He laughed, thinking I was joking. I didn't explain. I opened the driver's door and sank into the seat, leather warm from the sun. My palms pressed the wheel like it was a lifeline. I thought I'd feel proud, powerful even, but I just felt still, until a voice behind me cracked the moment open. "Excuse me," someone said. I turned. A tall man in a charcoal suit approached. His ID badge shimmered under the overhead light. Dr. Wells, director. I'd seen him maybe twice in passing. "Is this the car you've been working on with Ray in the garage?" he asked, nodding toward the Jag. "Yeah," I said cautiously. "That's the one." His eyes swept over the curves, the paint, the craftsmanship. Then he turned to the group of staff now congregating by the window, watching. "I told the board someone like you would make headlines," he said. They didn't believe me. I blinked. Then he raised his voice loud enough to carry. "Marcus Bell restored this vehicle with 0 relapses, built the entire engine block from scratch, and mentored 3 younger patients while doing it. That's not just rehab. That's genius." The group went quiet. Some jaws dropped. Others looked back at me. Then the car. Then back at me again like I had shape-shifted into someone they couldn't place. Someone worthy. Someone seen. And in that breath of stunned silence, with my hands on the wheel and the engine alive beneath me, I felt the first ripple of attention break across the surface. The silence was no longer mine alone. If you've ever been through something like this, drop a comment or let me know where you're watching from. Hit like or subscribe if family drama ever made you feel invisible too. The silence didn't last. As I pulled away from the center, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror, eyes steady, shoulders tense, jaw clenched tighter than I realized. The staff still stood at the glass, like a painting frozen mid-scene. One woman raised her hand in a slow wave. I didn't wave back. Not out of rudeness. Just, I was already gone. The road from the rehab center curled like a question mark around the foothills. I knew it too well. Countless drives with therapists. That one awkward family session that ended with my brother saying, "We'll support you once you stop acting like the victim." He didn't come back after that. Neither did anyone else. The first 20 minutes of the drive were silent. No music. Just the engine humming low. Steady. Like it understood something no one else did. I watched the trees blur past, sunlight cutting long slashes through the windshield. It felt like I was bleeding light. I hadn't cried when I left rehab. I hadn't cried when no one came. But driving now free, alone. In the car I built with hands that used to shake too much to hold a socket wrench, I felt it building. The first tear fell at the gas station. I stopped for water and stared at the cashier too long before realizing I was just trying to keep my face neutral, the way I always did before, hiding whatever was unraveling underneath. "Nice car," the guy behind me said. I nodded. "Thanks. You rent it or something?" That one hit deeper than it should have. "No," I said. "Built it." He raised an eyebrow. "No shit, I paid and left without waiting for more." Outside, the car looked too perfect for someone like me, too polished, too earned. I slid back in and shut the door. That's when I finally spoke aloud. "You saw it coming, didn't you?" "Dad," I whispered. "You knew they'd leave me there." He used to say it in half jokes. "Don't expect anyone to carry you out of the fire. Son, you walk out, or you burn." He'd been dead 4 years. But sometimes I still waited for his voice to come through the silence, like a low rumble under the world. I didn't burn, but I was alone. The highway home passed through the edges of the city. I took the long way past the warehouse district, past the old machine shop where I apprenticed when I was 17. That shop was where I learned torque ratios and carburetor tuning, where grease got under my fingernails and stayed there for years, where I watched the older guys sneak beers behind tool racks and learned silence was part of the job. I wanted to stop. I wanted to park the Jag and walk into the garage and say, "Remember me?" But I didn't. Instead, I drove on. I arrived at my brother's house just before sunset. Not because I wanted to see him, but because my mother had told me months ago, "If you're clean by summer, you can come to the barbecue." She said it like a challenge, not a promise. I stepped out of the car and heard laughter from the backyard. Children, a Bluetooth speaker playing Marvin Gaye, the smell of charcoal and sweet corn. No one noticed me at first. I walked through the side gate. The grass felt softer than I remembered. A balloon bobbed in the air, tied to a lawn chair. Then my sister-in-law spotted me. Her smile froze. "Oh," she said. "Marcus." She said my name like it tasted bad. I raised a hand. "Hey, didn't know you were coming." Was invited. A beat of silence. She turned her back to me. "Danny," she called to my brother. He emerged from the grill station, spatula in one hand, a beer in the other. He wore aviators even though the sun was nearly down. "Marcus," he said. Not a question, not a welcome. "Barbecue." I said, "It's summer." He didn't smile, didn't move closer, just stood there, like I was something the dog dragged in that had to be dealt with. "You drove here?" he asked. I tilted my head toward the front yard. "You'll want to see the car." He hesitated, then walked past me. When he saw the Jaguar, I watched his expression flicker for the first time in years. Not admiration, not jealousy, just confusion. "You said you were broke." I was. But this car, I built it in rehab, I said. From a shell. Did the wiring, the engine, the suspension, the whole damn thing. He turned back to me. So what? You want credit? I didn't answer. Behind us, someone came out with a plate of ribs. Another kid ran across the yard. The speaker changed songs. No one acknowledged me. I just came for a plate. I said, then I'll go. He looked at me for a long time. Then he turned and walked away. I stood there for a moment longer, feeling like a statue in someone else's garden. Then a voice said, "That's your car out front." I turned. A man in his 60s stood near the porch. Trim beard, pressed shirt, glasses that caught the last of the light. I didn't recognize him. "Yeah," I said. He held out his hand. "Dr. Cleary. I teach mechanical engineering at the university. That's one hell of a restoration." I shook his hand, unsure. "You build that yourself?" he asked. "Every piece." He looked at me again, this time not with doubt, but real curiosity. "We're launching a mentorship program this fall. For returning citizens, second chancers, that sort of thing. Would you be interested in teaching a workshop?" I blinked. "You serious?" "Very." He smiled. "They could use someone who knows what it's like to build something from ruin." I didn't know what to say, so I nodded. And that was the moment the music faded again. Not fully, but enough. Enough for two heads to turn. Enough for a child to pause with a juice box midair. Enough for the silence to trickle in from the corners. I felt it again, that shift. That quiet shock when the world realizes you're not the broken thing they filed away years ago. Not anymore. I didn't stay for the ribs. After Dr. Cleary walked off with his card pressed into my palm, embossed lettering, "Real weight," I stood there holding it like proof. Not of worth. Not yet. But of possibility. That tiny flicker that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't crazy to believe I had something to offer. I put the card in my pocket and walked back to the Jag. Nobody stopped me. My brother didn't call me back. My mother never came outside. The same people who once passed baby pictures of me around their tables now avoided my eyes like I was contagious. I eased into the car, closed the door, and let my forehead rest against the steering wheel. Breathe. 3 months of clarity. And yet, here I was, aching in the same spot I always did. That childhood wound, freshly poked. That old bruise that wore my last name. I started the car. This time, I turned on the radio. Some old soul song played low, crackling through the speakers like a memory. "Don't you feel it growin', day by day?" I pulled away slowly, tires quiet against the road. The house shrank behind me, party sounds fading like background noise in someone else's life. When I was younger, I used to dream about driving away from that place for good. No goodbye, no explanation. Just me and an open road. But leaving now felt more complicated. I didn't feel like running. I just needed to find somewhere that didn't keep pressing my old failures like buttons. I drove until city lights gave way to silence, until the streetlights disappeared and the road turned to gravel, until the only sound left was the engine I knew better than my own voice. I ended up at the edge of town. An empty lookout point we used to visit as teenagers. It wasn't special, just a ridge overlooking the highway, with a rusted guardrail and some graffiti that never changed. I parked, killed the engine, stepped out. The night smelled like dust and pine. The wind had a bite to it. I sat on the hood of the car, warm beneath me, and looked out over the tiny constellation of lights in the valley below. I thought about the first time I got high, 15, in the garage. My cousin handed me a pill and said, "Take this if you want to stop thinking for a while," and God help me, it worked. It wasn't about the high. It was about the silence, the stillness, the way it paused the storm that had been building in my head since I was old enough to notice my father flinch when I cried. But the silence didn't last. The pills became patches, then chains. And every time I tried to speak, really speak, someone would say, "You're just being dramatic," or "man up," or "we all have problems." So I stopped trying. The car was different. It didn't ask questions. It didn't flinch. When I twisted the bolts and rewired the circuits, the machine answered. Always. With honesty. If it failed, it was my doing. If it roared to life, it was because I made it roar. There's a kind of healing in that. And yet, I still wanted someone to say it. You matter. Simple. Plain. No pity. No condition. But it never came. Not from family. Not from friends who slowly stopped returning calls. Not from my brother, who always treated me like the background character in his perfect life. But now, on this ridge, staring at the stars with the hum of the engine still vibrating faintly in my spine, I realized something. I wasn't waiting for them to say it anymore. I had already said it to myself. Every bolt I tightened, every circuit I soldered, every mistake I fixed with trembling hands after a hard night in the clinic, I said it over and over again. Through those actions you matter, even if they don't believe it. Even if they never will. I lay back on the hood, staring straight up. The sky was impossibly wide, the kind of dark that feels eternal. That's when I remembered the letter. Back in rehab, our counselor had asked us to write a letter to someone we wanted forgiveness from, then another to someone we needed to forgive. I never sent either, but I kept them in the glove box. I slid off the hood, opened the car door, and pulled the papers out, folded in thirds, smudged with fingerprints and oil stains. I unfolded the first one, to Danny. I read it under the dashboard light. The words were clumsy, but real. I apologized for being the mess in his wedding photos, for showing up high to his daughter's birthday, for ruining so many family events they eventually stopped inviting me. Then I asked him to see me again, not as the addict, but as the kid who once rebuilt his BMX bike after it broke, who always tried to impress him, even when he didn't know how. I folded it again and let it sit on my lap. The second letter was harder. To me. I'd written it the day before my release. I was angry, but also tired. I forgive you. It started, for not knowing what to do when it hurt. I'd written about the boy I was, the man I became, the guilt, the shame, the moments of joy I let pass because I thought I didn't deserve them. And then, at the end, you survived. And that's enough. I put both letters back. Not because I didn't believe them, but because I wasn't ready to let them go yet. Some things take time. The wind picked up. I looked at the time, nearly 10 p.m. I needed to find a place to sleep. I didn't want to go home. Not yet. That apartment still smelled like withdrawal and damp laundry. So I got back in the car and turned the ignition. The engine came to life like a familiar voice. I drove toward the edge of town again. Past the old diners. Past the shuttered garage. Past the places where people used to know me, or think they did. I found a 24-hour diner off the freeway, parked far away under a flickering street lamp. Inside, I ordered coffee. Black. The waitress didn't ask questions, just poured, nodded, and walked away. I sat by the window, watching my reflection blur in the glass, watching the jag gleam under the yellow light. Then my phone buzzed. A text. From Danny. You left something on the lawn chair. I stared at the screen. I hadn't. But I knew what he meant. He was talking about the silence, the way my presence unsettled the story they'd been telling about me. I didn't reply. Not yet. Some things take time. I took another sip of coffee and watched the steam curl upward like smoke from a long dormant fire. The coffee stayed warm longer than I expected. Maybe it was the mug, thick and chipped. Maybe it was just the kind of night that wanted to hold on to heat. I didn't rush it. I sat there in the corner booth, fingers wrapped around the ceramic, staring out at the parking lot where the Jag gleamed like a secret. The waitress came back with a tired smile. "You want anything else?" "Hun?" I shook my head. "Just the coffee's good. Thanks." She gave a small nod and left me be. No questions, no small talk. Just the kind of soft presence you don't realize you need until it's in front of you. There weren't many people in the diner. An old man with headphones bobbing his head slowly to something only he could hear. A trucker scrolling through his phone. 2 teens sharing fries in silence. It felt like a place made for the overlooked, people drifting between hours, invisible to the rest of the world. I liked it here. I pulled out my phone again and read my brother's text one more time. "You left something on the lawn chair." Still no follow-up. No photo. No explanation. Just that one strange sentence. Maybe it was a peace offering in his own cryptic way. Maybe he wanted to remind me that I came and went like a ghost, like I always had. I thought about replying. I even typed something out. I took what mattered. But I deleted it before I could send it. Words like that start fires, and I wasn't interested in flames anymore. I finished my coffee, left a 10 on the table even though it only cost 2, and stepped back out into the night. The air had cooled. The asphalt radiated the last of the day's warmth. The street lamp buzzed faintly overhead like a dying fly. I slid into the car and turned the engine without thinking. The low growl soothed something in my chest. I didn't go home. Instead, I drove back toward the city. Not to the apartment, not to the rehab center. I had one more stop to make. It was a stretch of cracked concrete behind a shuttered garage, once called Cal's Auto. It used to be the place where men with too much noise in their heads went to lose themselves in grease and gears. I'd swept those floors as a kid. Learned how to recognize the weight of a socket wrench by feel alone. Learned when to speak and when not to. Cal had been the closest thing to a second father. He was rough, grimy, smoked too much and cursed like punctuation. But he believed in work, in transformation, in the kind of redemption that came not from apologies, but from action. I parked outside the rusting fence and stared at the building. The front window was broken. Long ago, boards nailed across it like a wound hastily stitched. But the old sign still hung above the door, faded letters peeling like skin. I reached over to the glove box and took out a small envelope. Cal's name was written on the front in shaky ink. I had written it during my 4th week in rehab, before I knew if I'd ever get out. I never mailed it. Couldn't find an address. But now I was here. I got out of the car and walked up to the door. The wood creaked beneath my boots. I slid the envelope between 2 boards and let my fingers rest there a moment. "You taught me to rebuild," I whispered. "Now I'm rebuilding myself." No response. Of course. But I imagined Cal would have snorted and said something like, "Took you long enough, kid." I stepped back, looked at the building one last time, then turned and walked away. I didn't cry. Not this time. It wasn't grief. It was gratitude. Driving back, I noticed the city looked different. Not brighter, just less blurry. Like someone had cleaned the windshield of memory and let me see it for what it was: hard, raw, unflinching, but still mine. I stopped at a red light downtown and watched the people on the sidewalk. A woman in a red scarf laughing into her phone, a couple holding hands, oblivious to everything but each other. A man dragging a suitcase with a busted wheel. No one looked at me. No one knew what I had survived. That I had walked out of a place with nothing and came back with something no one could take. The light turned green. I drove on. Eventually, I pulled into the parking lot of my building. A squat, two-story complex with peeling paint and a courtyard choked with weeds. Not glamorous, but it was mine. Paid for. Honest. The kind of place you come back to when you're done pretending. I parked in the corner spot, turned off the ignition. The silence was louder now, but not empty. I stepped out, duffel bag over one shoulder. The air was still, like the city was holding its breath. As I reached the stairwell, a voice called out, "Marcus." I turned. It was Janelle, my upstairs neighbor, probably in her late 40s, with eyes that missed nothing and a voice like gravel wrapped in honey. She was holding a trash bag and wearing slippers. "Didn't think we'd see you again," she said. "Didn't think I'd come back." She nodded slowly. "You look different." "I feel different." "Good," she said. "That car yours?" "Yeah. Looks like a damn spaceship. You do all that yourself? Every bolt?" She whistled low. "Well, shit. You're full of surprises." I shrugged, half smiling, trying to be full of something better these days. She chuckled and walked on. "Welcome back, Marcus." That hit deeper than I expected. "Thanks," I said. "Really." Upstairs, my apartment still smelled faintly like disinfectant and old dust. I opened a window, let the night in. The living room was simple. Couch, desk, a few books, a framed photo of my father I hadn't had the heart to take down. He was younger in it, pre-cancer, strong, watching me fix a bicycle with grease on my nose and pure focus in my eyes. I sat on the couch and let the stillness settle. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out a small black notebook. Inside were sketches of the car, wiring diagrams, notes from long nights in the rehab garage, but also entries about me, about the work I was doing not just on the car, but on myself. Scribbled confessions, late-night promises, a few curses. I flipped to the last page and wrote I wasn't picked up. I arrived. I built the damn ride myself. Then I closed the book and placed it on the shelf. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from an unknown number. "Hi, Marcus. This is Dr. Cleary. I spoke to the dean. We'd like to invite you to meet with the student design team next week. Let us know if you're open to it." I stared at the screen, then typed I'm open to it. Simple, plain. No promises, but enough. I plugged in my phone, washed my face, changed into a clean t-shirt, and then, for the first time in a long time, I lay down on my own bed, not because I had nowhere else to go, but because this was where I chose to be. Not running, not hiding, just here. I woke before sunrise. No nightmares, no jolts of sweat-soaked panic, just the soft hum of the city beginning its slow stretch into morning. The air drifting through the open window was still cool, almost sweet. Somewhere a bird chirped, defiantly early. For a moment, I just lay there, listening. The walls around me were thin, same as ever. I could hear the plumbing above, the occasional creak of a neighbor's footsteps. None of it bothered me anymore. It felt like life happening in the background, and I was okay being still for once. I sat up and stretched. My muscles ached in that satisfying way, like they were remembering how to carry a body with purpose. I went to the kitchen and made a cup of black coffee, no sugar, no milk, just heat and bitterness. As I leaned against the counter, sipping slowly, my eyes wandered to the notebook on the shelf, the one filled with my sketches, my rebuild notes, my moments of relapse I never gave in to. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I knew what was in there. I checked my phone. Nothing from Danny. Nothing from Mom. That same clean silence. I opened the message from Dr. Cleary again, reread it, not because I doubted it was real, but because I wanted to feel the reality of it settle into my bones. Meet with the student design team. There it was. An invitation to stand in front of people who had never known me as a failure, never seen the collapsed version of me curled up in a detox bed. They'd only see the man with oil on his hands and ideas in his head. I had 4 days. So I made a plan. I started in the garage behind the complex. My assigned unit C2 was basically a storage tomb. Dusty boxes, rusty shelves, spiderwebs spun over long-forgotten things. But beneath the tarp in the corner, I had another project. A 1973 Ford Torino, frame half-rotted, transmission dead, paint long faded into a sickly yellow. Most people would have hauled it to a junkyard, but not me. I rolled up my sleeves, took a long look, and said, "All right, let's see what's left of you." The next few hours passed in a kind of meditative rhythm. Unbolt, strip, measure, sketch. My hands remembered before my mind did. I lost track of time, and I loved that. Around noon, Janelle knocked on the garage door with a paper plate in her hands. "Figured you forgot to eat," she said, holding up a sandwich and some chips. I smiled. "You figured right." She looked past me into the garage. "You starting another one." "Trying to," I said. "It's stubborn." She smirked. "Like you." Then, I took the plate. "Thanks. Really." She leaned against the doorframe and crossed her arms. "You always working on something?" I shrugged. "I guess it's how I stay quiet without being still." She tilted her head. "That from a poem or something?" "No, just rehab talk." She didn't press, just nodded and let it be. Before she left, she said, "You know, people notice when someone changes, even if they don't say it." I watched her walk away, plate in one hand, slippers shuffling. I went back to the car, but her words stuck. That night, I cleaned the Jag for the first time since I left the center, not because it needed it, but because I wanted to give it respect. The hood shimmered under the overhead light. The leather interior breathed warmth. Every corner reminded me this was earned. Then I went upstairs, opened my laptop, and started reading about the student mentorship program. Their last guest instructor had been an engineer from General Motors. Before that, a retired professor. I didn't fit that mold. I didn't even have a degree, but I had stories. I had metal and grease and failure and clawed redemption. I started drafting my notes. Not a lecture, just a path. From broken frame to rebuilt engine, from withdrawal to direction. The next morning, I bought new boots. Not dress shoes, not some corporate costume, just clean, sturdy boots that didn't carry the memory of old failures. I also got a fresh notebook, blank pages, nothing stained, nothing torn. The woman at the cashier asked, "Back to school?" I smiled. Something like that. I spent the next few days splitting my time between the garage and my desk. I rewired the Torino's battery, sketched diagrams, practiced what I might say if someone asked how I got into this. I didn't want to tell a sob story. I wanted to tell the truth without bleeding. On the third night, I finally heard from my mother, a voicemail. "Marcus, your brother said you came by, that you built a car. I don't know what to say. I'm glad you're all right. We're having dinner Sunday. You're welcome to come, if you want. No apology, but not rejection, either." I saved the message, didn't reply, not yet. Instead, I kept working. By the fourth day, I had cleaned up the Torino's undercarriage and planned the wiring for a new ignition. I wasn't rushing the rebuild. I was doing it right. That morning, I got another text from Dr. Cleary. Student team will meet at 3 p.m. in Lab 7. Looking forward to seeing what you'll share. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I got dressed. Jeans, new boots, black t-shirt, the same jacket I wore when I left rehab, now stitched at the collar where it had torn. I brought my new notebook and, on impulse, tucked the rehab one into my bag too. The campus was bigger than I remembered from years ago, back when I used to drive past it thinking it was for people unlike me. Now I was walking through its gates. The building was clean and modern. Glass walls, bright light, student sketches on display outside the lab. When I entered, 6 students sat around a long table, talking over blueprints. They looked up as I came in. Dr. Cleary stood at the end, smiling. "Everyone, this is Marcus Bell. He'll be joining us today as a guest designer." I felt the old nerves stir, the twitch in my fingertips, the fear of being seen too closely. But then one of the students, a girl with ink-stained fingers, said, "Is that your Jag outside?" I nodded. "Built it myself." She grinned. "That thing's gorgeous." And just like that, I was in. I laid the notebook on the table, opened to a page of sketches, and said, "I want to show you what's possible when everything's broken and you build anyway." They listened, really listened, not with polite nods, but with fire in their eyes. They asked questions, took notes, laughed when I told them how I once used duct tape as a temporary hose clamp because I ran out of options. By the end of the session, they were already inviting me back. Dr. Cleary clapped a hand on my shoulder. "You belong here more than you know." I didn't reply. I just smiled. Because maybe, finally, he was right. The next few weeks passed in quiet momentum. No dramatic scenes, no sudden breakdowns, just slow, deliberate living. I returned to the university every Tuesday and Thursday, sitting with the design students in Lab 7. Some of them called me Coach, others just Marcus. The name sounded new, coming from people who had no memory of who I used to be. They only saw the man with blueprints and motor oil under his nails, the one who could explain why a turbocharged engine needed grace just as much as power. I liked it, more than I expected. One of the students, Emilio, stayed late, every session. He reminded me of myself at 17, quiet, precise, carrying some invisible weight in his jawline. One afternoon, he lingered after the others left and asked, "Did you always know you wanted to work with cars?" I looked at him for a moment before answering, "No. I just knew I needed something I could fix with my hands." He nodded, like that made perfect sense. Another girl, Priya, brought me a list of programs for adult learners, said if I ever wanted to formalize what I knew, the department could help me get started. "You already know more than half the professors," she said. "But if you want credentials, we got you." Her words sat with me the whole ride home. Credentials, a degree, a piece of paper that said what I had clawed my way back to was real in the language the world understood. I didn't commit. Not yet. But I folded the list and put it in my wallet. Back at the apartment, the Torino rebuild became my sanctuary. Every time I unscrewed a rusted bolt or realigned a crooked axle, I felt something else inside me shift into place. I no longer worked on the car just to stay sober. I worked because I was becoming something better with each motion. Not some fantasy version of myself, just someone honest. I hadn't responded to my mom's invitation, but I hadn't deleted the voicemail either. One Saturday morning, she called again. "Marcus." Her voice crackled through. "Your father's old watch. I found it in a drawer this morning. He said once it should go to you. I didn't listen then. I guess I wasn't ready. If you want to come by Sunday, it's here." She didn't apologize. She didn't beg. but her voice sounded thinner than I remembered. That night, I sat in the garage for hours, staring at the half-gutted Torino. The floor around me was a map of scattered parts. I found a small bolt in my palm and closed my fingers around it. Then I picked up the rehab notebook. I flipped to the back where I'd taped a photo of me and Dad, the one where we were both under the hood of his old truck, my hair sticking up in all directions, a socket wrench in my hand too big for my wrist. His other hand was on my shoulder. That photo had survived 4 apartments, 2 overdoses, and 1 near-death scare. I ran my finger over the edge of the picture and said out loud, "Okay." The next day, I put on the same jacket, slipped the rehab notebook into my bag without thinking, and drove out to my mother's house. I hadn't been back since the day I left for rehab. The place looked smaller. That always happens, I think, when you come back sober. The grass was cut. The porch still creaked underfoot. Wind chimes clinked softly in the distance. When she opened the door, she looked surprised to see me but not shocked, as if some part of her had been hoping this moment would come for longer than she would admit. "You're early," she said. "You said Sunday. It's Sunday." She stepped aside. "Come in." The house was the same in a way that hurt. Same dusty photo frames, same smell of old carpet and dried roses. I saw the chair where Dad used to sit, untouched, and the framed newspaper clipping of Danny's college graduation. We didn't hug, just stood in the entryway like 2 strangers sharing a memory. She gestured to the kitchen table. I made tea. I sat. She poured. We sipped. Silence stretched between us. Then she reached into a drawer and placed a small box on the table. Worn, wooden. I recognized it instantly. She pushed it toward me. "He wanted you to have it when you were ready." I opened it. The watch lay on a bed of faded blue velvet, silver band, cracked crystal. I held it like something living. I remembered the way it used to tick so loudly when Dad tucked me in. How he'd say, "This thing's older than me and still ticking. There's a lesson in that. It had stopped working years ago, but I could fix that now." I closed the lid and looked at her. "Thank you." She nodded, then looked down at her tea. After a long pause, she said, "You didn't need us, did you?" The question didn't sting like it might have once. "I did," I said quietly, but I stopped waiting. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. She just reached for her mug with both hands. "I'm sorry I didn't pick you up." I nodded. "I think I was scared," she added. "What if you relapsed in the car? What if I said the wrong thing? I didn't absolve her. I didn't say, 'It's okay,' because it wasn't. But I did say, 'I made it anyway,' and that, somehow, was enough for both of us." Before I left, she stopped me at the door. "Your brother's not there yet, but I think he's trying, in his way." "I know," I said. Then I drove home with the box beside me, resting on the passenger seat like an old companion. That night, I sat at the desk and opened the new notebook. I wrote the date. And below it, maybe the silence wasn't rejection. Maybe it was space to become who I needed to be. I turned to the Torino, lit under the garage bulb like something half-born. Then I opened the glove box and slipped the watch inside just for now. One day, I'd wear it again. But first, I'd bring it back to life. Just like everything else I once thought was lost. The next time I saw Danny, it wasn't planned. I had just finished a late session with the university team. Emilio had stayed behind again, asking about brake line replacements, and we ended up rebuilding a pressure valve from scratch with just scrap pieces and a stubborn torch. By the time I got back to my apartment, it was well past 8. I was pulling into the garage when I saw his car across the street, parked halfway over the curb like it hadn't moved in hours. I knew it was him immediately. Same black SUV, dented front fender, license plate still framed with his college mascot. The driver's window was down. He sat behind the wheel, arms folded, staring straight ahead. I didn't wave, just opened the garage door and parked the Jag. I got out slow, waited. He didn't move. I could have ignored him, gone upstairs, pretended I didn't see. But something in me, the part that no longer flinched, decided to walk over. I crossed the street and stood a few feet from the driver's side. "Everything all right?" I asked. He blinked, startled, then nodded. "Yeah, just thinkin'." A long silence passed. "Your car looks different in person," he added. "Meaner. It's real," I said. He looked down at his hands on the steering wheel. "I drove here twice this week. Couldn't get out." I nodded. "So why now?" He let out a small breath. "Because it finally pissed me off. That I'm scared of my own brother." His voice cracked slightly at the end, and that did something strange inside me. Not satisfaction, not revenge. Just a quiet click, like a locked door creaking open. I leaned against the hood of his SUV and crossed my arms. "You said once you'd support me when I stopped acting like the victim." He looked away. "I did stop," I added. "And you didn't show up." He rubbed his face. "I didn't know how. Everything I thought I knew about you. It was easier to keep believing it. You were the mess, the excuse, the one we whispered about." He looked at me again. "Then you show up with this car, this life, like you walked out of the wreckage holding blueprints." I let that sink in. "I didn't walk out clean," I said. "I crawled. I bled. I screamed into pillows for nights in a row. But I kept building, because I knew I'd rather live misunderstood than stay broken in ways that made you comfortable." He looked like he wanted to argue. Then he didn't. "I saw your name on the university site," he said. "They posted about your mentorship. Called you a craftsman. Felt weird?" I admitted. "But good weird." He nodded slowly. "I deserve that text you didn't send. I didn't write it to punish you," I said. "I just didn't think silence needed a reply." He tapped the steering wheel. "I didn't know what to say, but I want to try now. If that's something." I exhaled. Not sharply, just long, tired. "Then don't start with words," I said. "Come to the next student session. Sit in the back. Listen. That's enough." He nodded. "When Tuesday?" 3 o'clock. "I'll be there," he said, then added, quietly, "And Mom told me about the watch." I raised an eyebrow. "She said she left the porch light on after you left. Just in case." "She didn't mention that." "She won't," he said. "But she's trying. To." I stepped back and gave the side of his car a soft tap. "Then I guess we all are." He smiled faintly. "You still hungry?" I tilted my head. "Depends. There's a late-night pho place by Dad's old garage. Thought we could go. You used to like that place. You never remembered that before," I said, trying to. I looked back toward my apartment, then back at him. "Give me 10 minutes." He nodded. "I'll wait." Inside, I changed shirts, washed the grease off my arms, and paused in front of the mirror. My reflection didn't look like someone trying to prove anything. It looked like someone who had survived himself. I grabbed the notebook on the way out. Not the blank one, the old one. The one I once filled with sketches and relapses and midnight confessions. Because something in me said it was time to stop hiding the hard pages. We drove in silence most of the way, but it wasn't awkward. It was full, like a song without lyrics. The restaurant was still open, still fluorescent, still sticky with stories of long shifts and broken hearts. We ordered the same thing: rare steak, extra herbs, no bean sprouts. He picked at his napkin. "Do you remember the time I drove you home from the ER? After that thing with your ribs I did. I remembered sitting in the passenger seat, bruised and ashamed, trying not to cry. I remember. I said. I didn't speak the whole ride. He said. Not because I didn't care, but because I didn't want to hear your excuses. And now I asked. Now I wish I'd asked what you needed instead. I nodded. I needed silence back then, too, but not the kind you gave me. We ate in thoughtful rhythm, between bites. He asked about the students, about the car, about Cal's garage. I went by. He said, place is condemned now. Still has bones. I replied, I'm thinking about buying the lot, turning it into a place for rebuilds. People too. He laughed once. Low. A rehab garage. Something like that? He grew serious. You think people would come if they've ever had to put themselves back together with no manual and 2 shaking hands? Yeah, they'd come. He raised his glass. To new blueprints. I raised mine too. To rebuilding what's real. We didn't fix everything that night, but we found a rhythm. The beginnings of trust in small nods and shared broth. As I drove home, the streets felt different. Lighter. Not because the city changed, but because I did. Back at the apartment, I tucked the notebook away one final time, not hidden, just stored. Like a map I no longer needed to check daily. I sat on the bed, shoes off. Lights dimmed, and stared at the ceiling. I could still hear the wind through the open window, the faint hum of someone's distant TV. Life. Again. Then I reached for my phone and opened a blank message. Mom, dinner next Sunday, I'll bring dessert. And the car. I hesitated, then hit send. Seconds later, 3 dots appeared. Then, we'd love that. I smiled. And this time, the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was peace. The week leading up to Sunday dinner passed like a slow exhale. I spent my mornings at the university, helping Emilio and Priya prep their end-of-term presentation, a model for a low-emissions hybrid engine inspired by older Jaguar frameworks. Watching them work, watching them argue and solve and scribble calculations on whiteboards, reminded me of being under the hood at 16 with nothing but curiosity and noise in my head. Except now the noise was directed, harnessed. We had become a kind of team. In the afternoons, I was in the garage with the Torino. I'd rebuilt the timing chain and reworked the steering column. The radio didn't work, but I liked the silence. There was something about the smell of rust and rubber, the hiss of compressed air, that kept me steady. At night, I cooked. Real meals. Not the microwave stuff I used to live on. Cooking felt like building too. Intuitive. Forgiving. I liked the rhythm of it, chopping, stirring, waiting. I hadn't told anyone yet, but I'd started filling out the paperwork for that adult learner program. 2 nights earlier, I wrote an email to Priya with questions about transferring practical experience into course credits. She responded in less than 5 minutes with a PDF and a line that said, "About time you applied formally, Coach." I smiled when I read it. On Saturday morning, I visited the old cemetery. Dad's grave was near the edge, no bench, just a clean, flat stone beneath a leaning pine tree. I hadn't been in years. I sat down in the grass and rested my hands on my knees. "Hey," I said aloud. "It's been a while." There was no wind, no bird song, just the low hum of traffic in the distance. "I'm not angry anymore," I said. Or maybe I am, but it doesn't run me like it used to. I pulled the watch box from my jacket pocket, opened it, let the sunlight hit the cracked face. I'm going to fix this. Not because I need something from you, but because I finally understand what it meant when you wore it every day, even when it didn't work. I left the box beside the stone for a few minutes, just to let it breathe. Then I picked it up, dusted it gently, and stood. I'm not you, I said quietly, but I carry what mattered. I didn't cry, but something in me softened. Sunday came with blue skies and a strange calm. I cleaned the Jag until the rims gleamed, the windshield spotless. Then I drove across town with a pie I'd baked from scratch apple, cinnamon, a little nutmeg. I knew my mother would say I should have just brought store-bought. I brought it anyway. As I pulled up to the curb, I noticed Danny's car was already there. 2 kids were chasing each other across the lawn with foam swords. Laughter echoed. Windows were open. I cut the engine and sat for a moment, watching my own reflection in the side mirror. Then I stepped out. Mom opened the door before I knocked. She wore a soft blue sweater and had pulled her hair back the way she always did on Sundays. For the first time in years. She smiled at me without looking past me. "You brought dessert," she said, glancing at the pie tin. "Don't act surprised." "I am," she said. Pleasantly, inside. The house felt warmer. Lived in. The kind of space where noise didn't feel threatening anymore. Kids running, dishes clattering, the television murmuring in the background. Danny was in the kitchen, chopping carrots with the same hyper-focus he used to reserve for arguments. He looked up when I entered and nodded. "Glad you came." "Glad I was asked," I replied. He gestured to the counter. "Mom said you brought pie." I said, "No way in hell you baked anything." "She'll confirm." "She already did." "I'm eating my words." "I suggest whipped cream," I said, setting the tin down. He smirked and handed me a plate. "Make yourself at home." And for the first time in decades, I felt like maybe that invitation wasn't a trap. We sat outside for dinner, a long folding table in the backyard, mismatched chairs, paper napkins fluttering in the breeze. My niece asked if I was the cool uncle with the spaceship car. I told her I was just the guy who fixes things that people throw away. She seemed to like that answer. We passed bowls, shared stories, laughed at old wounds that didn't sting so much anymore. When the sky darkened, Danny lit the patio lanterns, and someone turned on music low enough to talk over. Mom sat beside me at the edge of the table. She sipped her wine and stared at the sky. "You look less angry now." "I am," I said, "but it's quieter." She nodded. "I'm glad." We didn't speak for a few minutes, just listened to the sound of family not breaking. "I wish I'd known how to help you back then," she said eventually. "You weren't supposed to," I said. "That was mine to do." She looked at me. Really looked. "But I could have stood closer." "You still can." That line, so simple, was the truth I hadn't been ready to give her until now. Later, when it was time to leave. Danny walked me out to the car. He circled the Jag, hand trailing along the fender like he was still trying to understand how it existed. "You're going to fix the watch?" he asked. "Already started." He gave a small laugh. "Of course you did." Then he turned serious. "There's this group I've been going to," he said. "For siblings of addicts? It's not much, but it's helped." I nodded. "That's good." "Really?" He hesitated. "I wrote something. For group. About you. About us. Do I get to hear it?" "Not yet," he said. "But maybe soon." He clapped my shoulder. "Drive safe." I got in and started the engine. As I pulled away, I caught a glimpse of them all through the rearview mirror, still at the table, still laughing. This time, I didn't feel outside of it. Just connected in a way that didn't need words. Back home. I sat at my desk with the watch cracked open beside me. Tiny gears, fragile springs, the heart of a thing that had outlasted a man. I worked in silence, hands steady, reassembling, aligning, breathing. And when the second hand finally ticked forward, almost imperceptibly, I smiled. Not because it was fixed, but because I'd brought it back, like I had done with myself. 2 weeks later, I stood in front of a classroom full of strangers again, but this time, not at the university. This was a local vocational center, tucked between a laundromat and a pawn shop on the south side. No glass walls, no bright atriums, just concrete floors, buzzing fluorescent lights, and rows of plastic chairs arranged beneath rusted ceiling fans. Most of the people in the room were older than me. Some wore coveralls, some wore street clothes. All of them had that look in their eyes, the guarded stillness of people who'd seen too much, survived too much, and didn't need inspiration, just direction. I had been invited by a woman named Rhonda who ran the recovery job placement program there. She'd heard about me through one of Dr. Cleary's lectures, asked if I'd come talk about rebuilding, not just engines, lives. At first, I said no. I wasn't ready to be a symbol for anything. But the next day, I remembered how much I hated the silence people left me in when I needed someone real to speak. So I called her back. Now, standing in front of them in my stained boots and dark t-shirt. I felt both familiar and foreign. I'm Marcus. I began, and I build things that shouldn't still run. A few people cracked smiles. One man crossed his arms, skeptical. I pulled out a photo from my folder, the first shot of the Jag, rusted and skeletal. This was the car I worked on while I was in rehab. It didn't look like much. It didn't feel like much. Kind of like me. I passed the photo around. I didn't have a blueprint, just fragments. A stripped frame, a few old manuals, and some shaky hands. They leaned in. Even the skeptical ones. What I didn't realize then was, the car wasn't the only thing I was rebuilding. I was rebuilding the way I saw myself. A woman in the back nodded slowly. When you're deep in it, in addiction, in self-hate, in silence, you think the only way forward is for someone to drag you out. But sometimes, you're the one who has to crawl. I paused. Let it land. I don't have a degree. I didn't graduate top of anything. I was the family screw-up. I spent my 28th birthday in a detox hallway. But I rebuilt that car. And now I teach students who weren't born when I first held a wrench. One of the younger guys raised a hand. So how'd you start? Like, really start? I smiled. I started with what I had. A broken car, 2 hands, and no one to call when I messed up. The room was silent, but not cold. It was the kind of silence that listens. After the session, a man in a Raiders cap came up to me, hands in his pockets. He said, "I've been sober 6 days. Feels like 6 years." I nodded. Yeah. The first week always feels like a lifetime. He hesitated, then said, "My daughter won't answer my calls. I get it, but damn." I didn't offer advice, just looked him in the eye and said, "Build something. Doesn't have to be a car. Just something that shows her you didn't stay down." He nodded and walked away without another word. And I just knew that he'd remember it. That night, I sat in the garage again. The Torino's engine was out now, the transmission half set. I worked slowly, methodically, watching the way each piece came apart. I didn't feel the need to rush anymore. The rebuild wasn't just a project now, it was part of me. Around midnight, I wiped my hands, sat back on the stool, and stared at the sketch tacked to the wall. A design I'd started weeks ago, a blueprint for a teaching space, a garage with classrooms, lifts, and a small cafe built into the side. I hadn't shown it to anyone yet, until now. I took a photo of the sketch and sent it to Dr. Cleary with a short message. "Do you think there's space for this kind of place?" His reply came a few minutes later. "Yes. And I know people who'd fund it. Let's talk Monday." I stared at the screen. This time, I didn't doubt it. The following Sunday, I brought the Jag to a small local car show, nothing fancy. Just a gathering in a supermarket parking lot with hand-painted signs, folding chairs, and old rock music playing from someone's phone speaker. I hadn't been to anything like it in years. When I pulled in, the crowd turned. She stood out. Clean. Sharp lines. That blue shine. I parked, popped the hood, and stepped back. People came forward, pointed, asked. One guy crouched down just to admire the brake lines. "You do all this yourself?" he asked. "Yeah. Rehab garage, piece by piece." He whistled. "Man, they need to make you the poster boy." I laughed. Not a poster, just a person who didn't quit. A kid walked up with his dad, eyes wide. "Is it a spaceship?" he asked. "Close." I smiled. She's faster than memory. Later, someone handed me a flyer for a mentorship network. Another guy said he had a shop on the east side and needed help with a rebuild. One woman gave me a card from a youth center and asked if I ever spoke at schools. I didn't expect any of it, but I didn't say no. Back home, I opened the watch box again. This time, the hands moved. Soft, steady, unafraid. I strapped it onto my wrist and let it sit there for a while, ticking in time with the world. And I thought, this is what healing looks like when you stop trying to prove it to everyone else. It looks like engines that purr, like students who ask too many questions, like brothers who text you just to say, "Don't forget dinner Wednesday." It looks like open notebooks, clean dishes, old watches brought back to life. And maybe, just maybe, it looks like a man sitting alone in a garage with grease on his arms and peace in his chest. Finally okay with the silence he once begged someone else to fill. The first time I drove the Torino out of the garage, it was almost midnight. No fanfare, no one watching, just me. The rumble of the rebuilt engine and the echo of my own breath filling the dark. I didn't even plan it. I had been tightening the last bracket, wiping my hands clean, and without really thinking. I slid into the seat and turned the key. She fired up like she'd just woken from a long, necessary sleep. No hesitation, no sputter, just a clean, throaty growl. I smiled without meaning to. The smell of oil and leather filled the cabin. The steering was tight but honest. Every vibration felt earned. This wasn't just another car. It was something made with patience, with hands that had shaken and steadied and healed. I took the back roads, drove past the old hospital where I detoxed, past the pharmacy I used to haunt for refills, past the alley where I once collapsed with a bloody nose and no memory of how I got there. I wasn't avoiding them anymore. I just knew I didn't belong in those places. Not now. The streetlights blurred across the hood as I picked up speed. The windows were down, and the air smelled like earth and spring and a little gasoline. I laughed out loud, not a nervous laugh. A full one, the kind that makes your chest feel lighter. A red light caught me near 10th Street. I rolled to a stop, and that's when I saw the kid on the sidewalk. Maybe 17. Hoodie, backpack, cigarette dangling loosely from his fingers. He looked up, saw the Torino, and froze. "You serious?" he called out. "Dead serious." I replied through the open window. He walked closer, awe on his face. "You built this from scrap." He let out a low whistle. "Looks like something out of a movie." "It's real," I said, "and it runs." He nodded. "I used to fix my uncle's Civic, but I messed up the timing, and he told me to leave it alone." I shifted into neutral and gestured toward the passenger seat. "Ever want to learn how to do it right?" He stared at me. "What I teach. There's a place. You want to see it?" He hesitated because the world teaches kids like him to be cautious of offers that sound too good. So I added, "No pressure. Just show up if you're curious." I tore a sheet from the back of my notebook, scribbled the address of the vocational center, and handed it to him. He took it, fingers brushing mine briefly. Then the light turned green. "Hope I see you there," I said. He nodded, folded the paper, and slipped it into his hoodie. I drove off. That moment stayed with me, not because I thought I'd changed his life, but because, for the first time, I understood something deep in my bones. Someone had to be the one who pulls over. Someone had to be the proof that a broken frame can be made whole, that someone could be me. I spent the next few days drafting a proposal, not a business pitch, a vision. I called it the Rebuild Room, a place where people came not just to fix machines, but to unlearn shame, where grease-stained hands meant effort, not failure, where relapse wasn't the end of the story, just a footnote. Dr. Cleary read it, smiled, and said, "Let's make this real." He connected me with 2 board members. A grant followed, then a space in old warehouse on the edge of town with a leaky roof and endless promise. I stood in that empty space a week later, blueprints in hand, and whispered, "You're not just a building." And I meant it. Danny showed up the next weekend with a toolbox. "I'm not good with engines," he said, "but I can paint, sand, patch drywall." I handed him a paintbrush. "Then let's start with the walls." Our mother stopped by with lemonade. The kids ran through the hall, laughing. I didn't ask them to quiet down. A month later, we held our first workshop. 7 students, 2 cars, 1 long table where people could sit and talk if the engine felt too heavy that day. The kid from the sidewalk showed up, too. His name was Malik. He now helps lead the Tuesday sessions. The Torinos parked in the front window, not for show, but as a reminder of what patience can build. Sometimes I sit in the back after everyone's left, notebook open, hands dirty again. I don't write confessions anymore. I write plans, curriculums, designs, names of people I need to check on. The other day, I found the Rehab bracelet buried in an old drawer, faded plastic, cracked edges, still smelled faintly like antiseptic. I held it in my palm, thinking I'd throw it out. But I didn't. I tucked it inside the toolbox under my desk, because forgetting isn't the goal. Carrying without crumbling is. Last night, I got a message from Emilio. "Got the internship, couldn't have done it without your help. Want you to meet my mom sometime, she's been hearing your name for months." I stared at the screen, then replied, "Proud of you. I'll bring dessert." I still wear the watch. It ticks steady now. Not perfectly, but enough. Just like me.